For my own journey and comparisons and to where we are at this moment, yes, I mean, I played it in an era where racism in the game was all over the game. When somebody like Raheem speaks, which is great, and I said it's been very positive, it's going to get more mileage, far more mileage than anything perhaps preceding this. I didn't realise how big a club it was, a fanatical fan base, an unbelievable stadium that you will probably never see the likes of again. This is a stadium bang in the middle of the city centre. You will almost never see that again. Unfortunately, for Hughton, he broke his leg in the period of time when I was there. And it was almost just at that time where we were just starting to see that change in him. If I looked at the situation of my departure there, I think the club panicked. I think we had some tough games in that period of time, even though we were 5 points above the relegation zone. And I think the club panicked at that time. I haven't said too much because I've always preferred not to, and I've always preferred to move on, as I've already said to you. But what I have told people and what I have said is that I never saw it coming.
Hello listeners, and welcome back to yet again another episode of the Beautiful Game podcast. As ever, I'm your host Budge, joined by my faithful two co-conspirators Dot and Dej. Gents, how are we doing this very evening?
I'm very well, Budge. We've got a pillar in our community on the platform, so I can't wait to get this started.
100%. And how about you, Dej?
Yeah, I'm doing very, very well. I've been getting to know Chris. He's a top man. We get on very, very well, and it's a pleasure to have him on our platform. It's a pleasure that he's decided to, help us out by coming onto our platform, because we need these big names to come and help us, grow what we're doing, and we appreciate it a lot.
Absolutely. So, of course, as the boys have alluded to, we are joined by a very, very special guest who most recently managed Brighton in the Premier League, who we led to promotion in the 2016/17 season. But he's also been the head honcho at Newcastle, where he did the same thing, gaining promotion in 2009/10. He's also been at Spurs, Birmingham and Norwich. He's a gentleman who places huge emphasis on attention to detail and discipline, a man of great diction, poise and temperament. I don't imagine he's done any tests on his ancestry recently, but I wouldn't be too surprised if we ended up finding out that he was a long-lost brother of Barack Obama. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we welcome Chris Hughton to the platform. Welcome, Chris.
Welcome.
Well,
it sounds like that introduction. I can leave now.
See you later, Chris.
I can follow that, but there you go. No, you're very welcome, and it's great to see the three of you and to on the show. Very much so.
Thank you, Chris. Chris, just to kick things off, take us back to the very beginning. I know you're, from East London, that Blackwall tunnel, you cross it and then you're in South, you go to the other end, there's traffic and then you're in East. Just tell us about your upbringing. Let's just start it there.
Well, I think as regards most kids of my era, then it was about playing in the streets. And I was brought up in East London with a Ghanaian father, an Irish mother, in a very multicultural area, and certainly as regards that Blackwall tunnel, then most of the traffic at the time was on the south side. So, we always felt quite comfortable on that east side, but it was a very, and still is a very multicultural area, and that's been the basis really of my upbringing. And as regards football, I was fortunate that I had a brother, or I have a brother, who was a year younger than me that also played football. So we looked for every single opportunity that we could to play football. And of course, that was the era when you could play out in the streets and wait till it's dark and then go back for your dinner and then try and sneak out again.
Yeah, so what actually got you hooked on the game, you know, from a young age? Who are your, you know, heroes growing up?
I must admit, I probably, because also as regards supporting a team, and as a young kid, I never really supported a team. I loved football. I think probably what might have been the difference is that on a lot of young lads that support a team, it comes from family. You know, that's who their family support or who the dads support. At the time, my father had no interest in football. He worked, so it was always just about playing. And of course, going back to the early years, you know, you remember my age, it was very much, you know, George Best and your Bobby Charlton, and of course at a proper young age, it was, you know, I still remember 1966 World Cup. But I think as regards, you know, individuals and teams, I didn't really have any. My real desire was just to play out as much as I could, and I suppose in them days we never thought of what we were doing as practice. You know, we just thought of it as fun. The more football we play, the less we had to spend indoors. The more football we play, the less time we had to spend doing some homework. And it was just, it was fun. And of course, during that period of time, what you realise, of course, in later time, is that what you're developing are skills.
Absolutely. And, you know, just then, Chris, you mentioned a few players that you admired growing up and who you looked up to. And in your career, you were a left back, and you didn't mention any sort of defensive players there. So I just wanted to get a bit of a steer on how you then arrived at your playing position. Were you always a defensive player? How did that all work out?
No, well, mine was, you know, in lots of stories, that you will hear in our game, you know, it can be about moments, luck, decision by somebody. As a young one, I played for the district, played with the district of Newham. Went to school, obviously, in the Forest Gate, Upton Park area. And although a right-footed player, I always played on the left wing. So what had happened was that when I got discovered by Tottenham, by that stage, I was still playing on the left side, but more a sort of left side midfield player. And what happened was that we had a youth team coach at the time, Peter Shreves, who liked me as a player. And one particular game, we were due to play in a semi-final, and the left back got injured. I don't have played in that game. I think I would have been sub in that game. He decided to play me at left back. And from that one game, then that was it. I played as a left back, more or less, apart from, of course, periods I played at right back as well. But apart from that, I more or less played every other game at left back. And that was one decision, left back being injured, put me into that position. And of course, having done well enough to maintain that.
Yeah, so for those of us that don't know, because obviously we're a younger generation, so how would you explain to us like the type of player you were, you know, in your pomp? Were you like a Andy Robertson type fullback? Were you more defensive? How would you define yourself?
I would define myself as an offensive fullback, and you know, probably, you know, there might have been them players. If I look at Tottenham, there was a left back in John Gorman who played a number of games before me, who was a similar type player, right-footed left back, but an attacking fullback, semi sort of attacking. Before that was a wonderful player called Sil Knowles, wonderful player, wonderful left foot. And so, but wouldn't have been as attacking one. So probably my era, or the way that I played, was the real sort of initial change. You know, generally fullbacks were defenders. You know, good purveyors of the ball, good service into the front. You know, link up, support the midfield players. And so probably, you know, I would have been one of the first more natural attacking fullbacks, where probably more people would have known my game for the attacking parts. Defensively, I could defend because I had good pace. but more would have recognised my game from the attacking part of the game, and able to assist some goals, and for a fullback, even able to score a few goals. Not as many as I missed, but a few goals.
So, Chris, we spoke to Andy Cole earlier on in the week, and we described what's going on in the world today as a global pandemic, and we wasn't speaking about coronavirus. We were speaking about racism within society. So, as a black man, when you were coming through, did you suffer any sort of racial slurs, and did you have to work 3 times harder to get an opportunity?
Well, certainly as regards what's happening at the moment, and I don't think there's anybody of any nationality that it hasn't affected. But for my own journey and comparisons and to where we are at this moment, yes, I mean I played it in an era where racism in the game was all over the game. You played in away stadiums in particular, and you knew some stadiums more than others that you was going to get racial abuse. We suffered racism on the football pitch personally, and also we could see others giving out racial abuse. So it was something that was part of the game the exact same way as it was part of society. So I grew up in that. And there are ways to deal with it. Some can deal with it better than others. What didn't change was the fact that it existed, and you had to maneuver your life around that. You was always in situations where you knew that potentially there could be something said. You had to tread a little bit more carefully, and as I said, try and maneuver your way around that. And some found that harder than others. And the game will be full of stories in the community where there were them young players, young black players, that found it hard to maneuver around that one and suffered from it. And any progress they might have made in football was always going to be very difficult.
Chris, in 1979, you became the first black player to represent the Republic of Ireland. And of course, you went on to make 53 appearances for the country as well. And we recently have seen Raheem Sterling come out and criticize the media for its portrayal of black players versus white players. Now, I can't imagine it would be easy for you to sort of cast your mind back to around about that time when you were making your debut for Ireland. But if you can remember, what was the media's response to that back then? We obviously are speaking about sort of then and now, and the fact that there's been very little change over the years, and we're sort of still seeing the same issues rear their ugly heads now as ever. And was that also prevalent in the media back then as well?
Well, what you have to remember now is that the media now, as i.e. this program, what I'm doing with you lads tonight, it's the media then was nowhere near what it is today. So I mean, I remember the first thing, certainly what I can say is that it was something that I was very proud of, to be the first black player to play for Ireland. And of course, in the years that have preceded that, it's there have been many more that have played. So at the time, it was a bigger deal in Ireland, but I would have to say all positive, all positive, and I think probably a little bit perhaps more, because at the time I broke into the Spurs team, was doing very well, even if I say so myself, And there was talks about, possibly representing England or getting that chance to represent England. So I think that the Irish public, the Irish papers, saw it very much that, listen, this is somebody that wants to play for us. Could wait for an opportunity for England, that wants to play. So that was everything that that was positive then. But of course, these days are different, and the level now of media and the amount of media and the amount of coverage is going to pick up everything. And for something, and I do think that Raheem Sterling has said so many good things and so many measured things, over this period of time. But of course, when somebody like Raheem speaks, which is great, and I said it's been very positive, it's going to get more mileage, far more mileage than anything perhaps preceding this.
Yeah, so Chris, when we look at the media now and we see the outcry of emotion, we're seeing brands come out of movements. Sky have said they're going to back a scheme which funds equal representation in the media. Do you have a glimmer of hope that change is on the horizon?
Yeah, I know I do, but something, for something that has been so bad, over the last couple of weeks, then what you have to look at the reaction, and I would have to say that there has a wonderful reaction, very multicultural reaction as regards the responses, but it's all about change, and I would be, at some stage what will happen is that if I'm looking at the level at where we are now, the level of emotion of where we are now, is that that will die down. It will. It's normal. It's natural. So for somebody of my experience and my age, we have been there before. I would have to say, certainly not in this country, not at the level that I think it is now. How long it's lasted, but we have been there before. But it all has to end up in one category, and that is change. And the only way you can see change is if there is a real enthusiasm to change, if there's a real enthusiasm for it to change. And I think we can only hope that with everything that we're going through at the moment, that happens. But some of the reaction, I think, has been very good and been very positive from a lot of different angles.
So Chris, how do we keep this, at the forefront of people's minds? Because I saw a graphic today online, I think it was via The Guardian, and it was some damning statistics when it came to the black representatives at boardroom level in this country. The FA, 0 out of 11. UK athletics, 1 out of 9. English golf, 0 out of 12. Rugby football union, 0 out of 14. So what needs to happen for us to see change?
Well, probably, the first thing is, and looking at, the three of you there, and looking at your age, one that I think that has enthused, everybody of my age has been the reaction. The marches itself, so many young individuals of different colours, nationalities, and so it's about, it's always going to be about applying pressure. I also have no doubt that for what we are seeing at the moment, that organisations, whether it be football club, businesses, industry, I think as we go into the future, I think we'll be under more pressure. They'll be under more pressure, and they'll be under more scrutiny to make sure that the upper levels of their organisations are an appropriate or true reflection of the workforce. And the only way that can happen is by continual pressure. And of course, for what we're seeing at the moment and the reaction that we are seeing, there is a wonderful reaction from a lot of people that are in, powerful positions. Now, what has to change is that, decisions on talking and what we would like in that enthusiasm to making things change. And I can't see that happening overnight. I think there will be a reaction. I don't see it happening overnight, but I see enough people incensed at the moment, and I see enough graphs, stats, of underrepresentation or so, that I think it will and should, affect those that makes the decisions. And this is something we can talk about now, but again, it's back to a real desire to want to change for whatever reason, whether it's an actual desire because morally you think that should happen, or even if you think it's under the present circumstances, it's something that has to happen, then that's where the changes will come.
Yeah, when you stats, I mean, Raheem Sterling said in a statement as well, when you look at the likes of Sol Campbell, he's been given jobs, to call it jobs. Macclesfield, where he was fighting fires. Southend, where I've actually gone to watch one of these teams play, and it's at clubs where they're struggling to pay the bills. It's not befitting of his prestige as a man and as a manager. And when you look at the likes of Steven Gerrard, Frank Lampard, they're being, shoehorned into these luxurious roles. What do you think needs to be done as a leading black manager to bridge that gap and for, black coaches, black managers to be given a fair crack at the whip?
Well, I think certainly it's about having more role models. And of course, you can't have more role models unless them persons are in positions. They're in positions, and when we talk about positions, we've got to talk about visual positions. If I look at the English game, and if we talk about the Premier League in particular, the Premier League is shown in probably a new country. Every month or every week of the year, there's a new country taking on the brand and watching Premier League football. So visually, it's about black and ethnic coaches, managers in visual positions. But it's something that we've been pushing for and arguing about for so long now. And I think what we have had is that and remember, in all of these conversations I have with you, I go back a long way. And, going back certainly as a player, and the presumption, the stigma, or whatever you want to call it, that black players were good players, but they weren't managerial or captain material. And I think that existed for some time. I think we lost during that period. I think some wonderful potential managers and coaches that didn't see a pathway through to management and chose to go in a different direction. But I think the perceptions have to change. And I think probably over the years, the perceptions haven't changed enough. And if the perceptions don't change enough, as with anything in life, you as much as possible have to try and change them perceptions. So whether that's through what they see, or whether that's through what we're seeing at the moment, a demand, a pressurizing of what the actual stats are, what we have experienced, same as what we've experienced in the country, what we have experienced in football, we have experienced over the years racism in football. And if our stakeholders believe that and understand that, then what has to happen is they have to redress the balance. And there has to be a real enthusiasm to want to do that. In some aspects, I've seen that. I've seen that with what the FA have done with the BAME coaches associated with each of the individual national teams. And I think that is a plus. And I would very much think that they are, at this moment, very much with what's going on, seeing how they can improve things even more. But it's changing perceptions. And if you can't change perceptions, you have to do it by pressure.
Piece in The Athletic from Carl Lanker, and it was very eloquently written. He said, they want our bodies, but they don't want our minds in football. Would you agree with that statement?
Well, I don't think it's. I know exactly what he's saying, but I think it's more or less what I said, which is very much how they saw black players, and it's about changing that perception. So how can you change that perception? You can only change that by perception by there being more people in visible positions of black and ethnic origins. That's all it can be, changing them positions. There are so many good young BMA black and ethnic coaches, managers. Look in the system now at academy level. Certainly, that's one area that I think we have seen an improvement over the years, probably at grassroots level and academy level. But it's about that step up from that level to the visible levels, which are senior football and, of course, first team management. But it's getting rid of that perception that black, and it doesn't have to be. Remember, we're talking about players, ex-players. It doesn't have to be black ex-players being good coaches. It's black and ethnic men, women being good coaches.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, Chris, taking it back to your career, I wanted to ask how you found that transition from player into management. Was it something that was always on your mind? Did you always feel that at some stage, once you'd hung up the boots, that you would like to go into management? And obviously, we're talking now about the fact that there are so few black and ethnic minority managers in the game now. You can only imagine how, back at, when you were making that transition, you can't have seen many people around. And so what kind of encouraged you to continue to pursue that route?
Yeah, well, my pathway was a bit different. And you are right. Keith Alexander was probably one who was sadly passed away. But Keith was a wonderful friend, somebody that I confided to, and a wonderful coach, and we're very well thought of. But my pathway was different. When I finished playing, at Brentford. I left Tottenham 1990, had a year and a half at West Ham, then I went to Brentford. Both of them periods of my footballing career I thoroughly enjoyed. But when I finished playing, Ozzy Ardiles, who I'd known very well from my time at Tottenham, got the Spurs job and wanted to take me in as his reserve team coach, or under 21 coach at the time. And that generally that's how it worked. How it worked was that if you are, you get a manager's job, generally, of course, it's got to be somebody that you are very confident is a good coach, but it's certainly somebody you can relate to, somebody that you are friendly with, somebody you can trust. So I was very fortunate that Ozzy took me in at that time as under 21 coach. And in that first year, so something that I can tell you, and for any young aspiring coaches there, it's not always easy. And I must admit, I went from playing to going into coaching. And that first year, I was really fortunate. We had a coach, a player who played for West Ham called Pat Holland. And he was a really good coach. And he took me under his wing that first year, and the two of us sort of worked with the reserves. But he could see things that I never saw so naturally. So for anybody who thinks that, just because you had a full playing career, that you can naturally just go into coaching, it doesn't work that way. For some, it's more natural than others. But my pathway was different, as I said, and I then went on and spent 14 and a half years at Tottenham, working under 7 different managers, and for the large majority of that time working with the first team. And probably my ambitions for a big part of that wasn't to become a manager. It was about doing the best job that I could. I was fortunate that I was at a club that, as each manager went, the owners of the club wanted me to stay on, and they felt that I could assist the new manager, and I would be a plus for the new manager. So I think when you've got that type of responsibility, or also that real desire to want to manage, sometimes isn't there. But certainly in the latter part of my time there, the desire was very much there. Of course, then I went to Newcastle as a coach under Kevin Keegan, who I thoroughly enjoyed working under, and everything.
How was he like? Because you get this sort of, you see, people come out and talk about his famous line, that he said in the media. How was he like to work with?
Brilliant, and everything. And remember, Kevin's older than me, but he's my era sort of, even though he's older than me. But the impression that I got from Kevin was everything you saw about him was, and of course, as you saw in that famous clip, was enthusiasm, passion and enthusiasm. He had this wonderful way of being close to the players, being able to have a laugh and a joke with them. Very funny, enjoy training, like training to be, serious, but, fun. But he had this way of switching. So when it came to the serious parts, half time, at the end of the game, post game, really good. Also, really good the next day. Bad result. Are you going to be depressed the next day and show the players that? No, Kevin would always come in with a spring in his step. So, that was, having worked with so many managers at Tottenham, it was really pleasing for me for somebody that I knew was a top manager to work under for that period of time. I learned a lot from Kevin. But yeah, exactly how you saw him, that's how he was, enthusiasm and passion.
So, Chris, I just want to go back to that, transition from player to coach, because we have, a lot of aspiring young coaches from all over Europe listening to this podcast. So what key soft skills would you say are needed to make it in this industry as a coach?
Well, probably two things. As a young coach, certainly it's about being yourself, because what you can do is that you can watch so many sessions. You can go on the internet and watch coaching sessions from 6 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night. It's about getting out on the grass, and because if I look at my experiences, I learned more in that first year than working with somebody than I thought I ever would, and that's because it's that transition from playing, if you was a player, but if you're a coach, actually getting out on the grass and taking sessions, because that's where you learn more. That's where you get a little bit more comfortable, because even that first time, remember to it. You've played or so, or you're an aspiring coach, and then you've got to do a team talk before the game, half time, and at some stage you would have never done that before. So it's about getting out on the grass and coaching at whatever level, because that's where you get the real feel. That's where you start, particularly these days, start to see some patterns, some qualities. Can I improve players? But most importantly, you get used to working with a group of individuals. You can do all the work you can in the classroom and badges, but nothing will take the place of actually working with a group on the training pitch, and the feel of improving players, the feel of doing a session. So whether that's even with a group of under 8s, whether it's under 15s, under 6, but doing a session and finishing that session and having that real good feel that I enjoyed that, or that went well, or that feel of that didn't go so well. there's certain things that could have gone better, and I'm going to need to improve. So two things: personality, coach within your personality. Don't try and be something that you're not, but spend as much time on the training pitch, coaching, whether it's young kids or older kids as you can.
Yeah, so Chris, obviously you really came to prominence at your time at Newcastle. I remember the season, Joe Kinnair was there, then obviously he left. You came to be caretaker manager. Alan Shearer came in, then you came to be caretaker manager. Then obviously you were given a job when the club moved to Championship. And how difficult was that to oversee the job of, getting rid of the likes of Mark Viduka, Michael Owen, and, a club that's in disarray? And when you speak to players that have played for Newcastle, we've had Danny Simpson, John Joe Shelby on this platform, and they've spoken about the grand stature of the club. I don't think people actually realize unless you go to the city. And you were the man that were given the task of getting the club back to the Premier League. So if you could just talk us through, the scale of the task that you had to oversee.
Well, firstly, as regards to the scale of the club, you are right, and probably before I went up there, I'd been up there as a player, and so, but probably I didn't realise how big a club it was. A fanatical fan base, an unbelievable stadium that you will probably never see the likes of again. This is a stadium, bang in the middle of the city centre. You will almost never see that again. All the modern grounds are generally built on the same stadium or in the outskirts. So yes, massive club. I think what certainly helped me, and if I go back to experience and as first coaching to where I was at that time, and I think it certainly would have been a lot harder for me if I hadn't gone through the experiences that I had. And the experiences I had as a coach was that I'd had some sort of 16 years experience as a coach working with managers, and in particular probably my last 3 years at Tottenham, where I worked with Martin Jol. Other managers that I worked with, there were generally 2 or 3 of us, an assistant. I was first team coach, but it was just me and Martin. So I worked very close with him. So that was a wonderful period for me, and I learned a lot in that period. And I always think, whenever anybody asks me, I always say that that was my apprenticeship. For others it's a lot shorter, but I had a long apprenticeship that stood me in good stead for what I was about to go into, because there was, and as you alluded to, it was a club where the owner was trying to sell. There was a group of players that looked at the fact that the club had gone down to the Championship, that really wanted to be playing at Premier League. So there was the big we were probably a better team and in better shape, once the decisions were made on who wanted to go and who wanted to stay. Once that was determined, the ones that wanted to stay and fight to get this club back up into the Premier League, then things were more comfortable. And one thing I did know, I knew we had a very good team. I knew we would be favourites. So probably the two biggest things were a new manager going into that one, was making sure that the group of lads that wanted to stay had enough desire for the fight. I was fortunate we had some very good individuals, strong individuals, and the media, because of course that was one thing that I hadn't had to deal with. The managers at previous clubs had always done the press conference that dealt with the media. And Newcastle is not an easy club. There was always something going on. So that was probably something that I had to learn. And it was a very fast learning curve at a club like Newcastle.
Yeah, I think that summer as well, so Bobby Robson sadly passed as well. So there was a lot going on. And obviously Newcastle right now, they're in the midst of another takeover bid. Apparently this one's close with the Saudi owners. How is it like dealing with Mike Ashley? Because you see him a lot, you don't hear about him. So how were you treated by the club, by him and, Derek Lambias?
Well, I think there's two. There are probably three sides to this one. So firstly, generally, you know, I'm very happy to speak about. I really haven't spoken too much about, you know, my departure at the club, because of, you know, whenever that has happened, my mindset has always been about positivity and moving on. But to answer your question as regards to dealings, with most of my dealings wasn't with the owner, and you remember in my period of time there, we won the championship, and of course, you know, when, you know, our sayings in football very much about when things are going well and things are not. When things are going well, you can ride most things. You know, you have so many good weeks. Monday mornings are great mornings. When things are going badly, then it's different. So probably what happened was, because most of my time there as a manager, even in the Premier League, was either good or decent. You know, I never had so many meetings with the owners. So most of my meetings would have been very much with, you know, Derek Lambias or with the club secretary at the time. But going back to that one again, most of that time there, you know, we were doing quite well. So most weeks were good weeks. As regards my departure, I think the general feeling at the time, and of course it's something that much were expressed by myself, that it was something I didn't expect, and most people didn't expect, and most people felt it was wrong. So I wouldn't deviate from that. I was very, very surprised to go, very disappointed to go. I felt I'd done well enough to not deserve that. But as soon as that happens, and most of my comments afterwards were very much about moving on. You know, I had a wonderful...
Didn't you sense it coming though? Because, you know, I remember you beat Sunderland 5-1 in the derby, and there was talk about a new contract that wasn't forthcoming. Because I remember Colin Calderwood coming out after the decision was made, and he said, you know what, we had a feeling something was a bit amiss. Would you go along with that?
Yeah, I mean, there are aspects of it. I mean, you know, it would be, you know, wrong of me or foolish of me to say that, you know, I absolutely had no idea. I had a contract that was up at the end of the season, and I hadn't signed a new contract. So did I expect it at the time? No, I didn't. We dropped down, I think, from 10th in the division. We'd lost at West Brom and dropped down to 11th place. So did I expect it at the time? No. But as I said, I hadn't signed a new contract. And of course, if you haven't signed a new contract, then there's always going to be that insecurity. So I can't sit here and say that, you know, it was a mega surprise, but the timing was a surprise, yes.
Chris, I was going to move to your time, you know, at Birmingham, because I know you're very fond of your time there. Obviously, you worked with, you know, some honest pros like Jack Butland and Kurt Davis. But I just want to, you know, keep this as raw as possible, because I feel that for some sort of reason, you're just seen as like a manager that's a safe pair of hands, or a manager that's, you know, going to do a good job in the interim. But people don't have the perception of you of being this great tactician or, you know, attacking manager. I just feel that there's some sort of barrier that people have, you know, tarred you with. And I just want to get your thoughts on, how do you feel you're perceived in the wider audience of the media?
Yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying. I think probably, you know, some of that of what you say is because, you know, that I've been devoid of that job. I suppose that what you would regard, you know, job that's going to allow me to, particularly at Premier League level, to aspire to different things in the Premier League. You know, being able to manage a club that realistically that can finish in the positions, you know, certainly above mid-table and pushing for, you know, Europa Cup and Champions League. So I understand what you say. You know, what my reference always to is you know, we've spoke about, you know, stats and people in jobs and so on. And I'd like to think that wherever I've been, that I've done the job that I've been asked to do. The reason why there could be or people could perceive me as that, I can't answer that one. You know, my personality is what it is. I'd like to think that certainly at Birmingham, which was my second role, that we done a good enough job there. And generally, when I'm talking about I'm talking about we, because, you know, I have a group of coaches, or a coach, or a couple of coaches that have come with me and have worked every bit as hard as I have to get any success that I've had. But, you know, they're the sort of answers that I can't give you. It's only other people can. You know, I'm somebody that's worked as hard as I can in the roles that I'm in. I'd like to think that I've had success in the roles that I'm in, and you know, if people's perceptions of me are different to what the facts are, then, you know, it's difficult for me to do anything about that.
Chris, do you almost feel that, you know, when you look at the boardroom, you look upstairs, there's no one that understands your background. There's no one that looks like you. So when stuff starts declining in terms of results, performances, they're like, look, we have to pull the trigger. We don't have trust in him.
I can tell you quite honestly, no, I don't feel that, and I've never felt that. And certainly, if you ask me, and if we're talking about managers, if it might be regarding somebody else that I have an opinion on, then possibly I could give you that opinion. But I must admit, I haven't felt that. You know, I've been employed in 4 different clubs. As I've said to you, that I'd like to think my record in them clubs has been good. But I think, you know, over and above that, it's, you know, I can't honestly say that. Others might, and others might feel that way, and others might voice that way, as you have done. But I can't honestly say that I've felt that.
You know, when you were talking about the team that you were managing in Newcastle, it was a talented bunch, and of course you also oversaw some very shrewd signings that helped you know, the team performances and what have you. And I wanted to drill down to one player in particular, which is a certain Hatem Ben Arfa. What I wanted to ask first and foremost is, where does he rank among the players that you've managed and coached in terms of ability? And also, you know, he is a player that has received a lot of criticism in the media, and a lot of people have felt that he's reached the heights in his career that he could have because of a lack of discipline, and whether you feel that those critics are fair in their assessment.
Well, certainly my first assessment in it, which is what you alluded to, is talent, and he is one of the most naturally talented players that certainly that I've signed, but what I've worked with. One of the shames that we had in my period of time there was that he when we looked like we were just to have that breakthrough with him, because there's always going to be that balance. There's always going to be that balance between talent, natural talent, and discipline. And when I mean discipline, I don't mean discipline turning up late for training. I mean the disciplines of the game, you know, on your roles and responsibility on the football pitch. And with Ben Arfa, I think it was always trying. Of course, you know, he was there for a period of time with me, but he was there for a longer period of time with the next managers. or the next manager. So I think he had to deal with more than what I had to deal with. Unfortunately, for Hughton, he broke his leg in the period of time when I was there, and it was almost just at that time where we were just starting to see that change in him. That's, you know, that natural ability that he showed on the training pitch, what he could do in the games, to him being a consistent member of the team that others could rely on. And that's, you know, that's the art of coaching and management, you know, trying to fit that type of individual in. And there's no doubt that when you have that type of individual, you know that, you know, his abilities, unless you're talking about the top players, his abilities are going to, you know, outweigh perhaps the other side of his game. And as a manager, it's about making him, them areas where he doesn't do so well, for trying to get that right balance in the team so others can compensate for what he hasn't got. But if you ask me if he achieved what he was capable of achieving, I think the obvious answer is no, because I think we saw somebody that had real top class ability. Yeah, has he had a career and a good career at the game? Yes, he has. You know, was he, you know, capable of reaching, you know, bigger heights than yes, he was. Yeah.
And you know what, Chris? Typically, in most professions, right, when you have someone who is leaving a role and coming into a role, there is a handover process. And a question that I've always wanted to ask is, does that apply also in the world of management? So when, you know, if you're leaving a club or you're sacked, and then there's another manager coming in, is there a handover process of sorts? And the reason I ask is because we recently spoke to Brendan Rodgers, and he mentioned that, you know, when he was sort of leaving Liverpool, he invited Klopp over to his house, and they had, you know, a very open and honest conversation. And I just wondered if that was a one-off or if that was actually something that was quite regular in management, in that, you know, there is a kind of a process like that.
No, I think I think for what Brendan said, you know, would have been right for him in the circumstances for him. Generally, the answer to that one is no, because it depends on how you leave the club. You know, and if you looked at the percentage of managers that leave a club on good terms, then that would be the lower of the percentages. You know, generally it's like any walk of life. You know, wherever you all work. You know, if you are sacked one day, then that's it. You're gone at the end of the day, sort of never to return.
Birmingham came knocking on the door, and this is probably one of your more underrated spells as a manager, because you were coming into a club fresh off relegation, embarking on his first, you know, Europa League campaign in 50 years, having to get rid of, you know, key players such as Roger Johnson, Scott Dann, Gardiner. How did you go about navigating that season and instilling a new belief? Because you actually went into the playoffs and it was a very, very successful season, even though there was a lot of uncertainty going on behind the scenes.
Well, if we talk about it, then, you know, I'd gained great experience at Newcastle, and some of the circumstances were the same. This is a team. The only difference, which in the end was a benefit, was that the team had won the League Cup, and obviously beaten Arsenal in the
I think Budge is a bit sad about that. He's a big Arsenal fan.
Well, he can't still be sad now, can he?
No, when you don't win much trophies, it hurts.
No, listen, I understand, Stan, but they certainly won a good few after that. So my time there would have been similar to Newcastle, where it's a team that had been relegated. We knew we were going to lose players, and we lost. You know, I can remember Scott Dann was one of them. We lost him literally the day before deadline day, So it was very much similar. Those that were there, and I think when you're in that position, the best day at the start of the season is the end of transfer deadline day, and because at that time you know who's staying, and the ones that wanted to go, that didn't go, know they have to knuckle down at least until January. So it was a similar scenario. What we had was something that you could look at, good or bad. But the Europa Cup was, so would that be a plus or would it be a hindrance with the amount of games that you played with the squad that we had? For us, it was a plus because we had Birmingham supporters going abroad singing songs that some of the Birmingham supporters hadn't heard for years. So, that really galvanized our season, and we was able to take that into our league campaign. You've got to have some fortune, when it's that type of season. I think we played something like 62 games that year, something possibly more. And I can remember in one player, Chris Burke, I think played every game but one, that season. So we had to be lucky, which we were. We had a lot of players that played a lot of games. But it was the Europa Cup campaign that I think really motivated the team and gave us that continuity into the league campaign. It was a big blow when we didn't make it through to the final of the playoffs, but a really, really enjoyable year. And of course, the Europa travels gave a Birmingham City support, that hadn't done it for years, the opportunity to you, and they travelled in their thousands.
Yeah, so talking about the good times, I remember last day of the season, you beat Manchester City away from home, and probably looking at it retrospectively, that didn't really do you much favours because there was a big jump up in the league, which probably, shall I say, paved over the cracks in terms of going into that next season and the expectations kind of thing. But with regards to you leaving the club, how was Leah? Because we see on the TV, she seems like a bubbly character. How was she in handling your departure of the club? Was it amicable, or did you feel a bit let down by the decision that the club made?
No, I mean, I think there's two things. I'll go back to the last game. We actually jumped 5 places.
Yeah.
On that last game, we were fortunate. I think we won our last 3 games of the season, I think. But that last game at Man City, yeah, we jumped 5 places. So you were always going to take that. I think as a manager, would you say, well, we might be better off in lower net, and expectations are not going to be as high. You, and also, of course, it's Premier League money, and that put an additional few million into the club. But I think as regards a relationship with Delia, sometimes decisions are made. I had a very, very good relationship with Michael and Delia. And I've been back to Norwich on a few occasions and continue to have a good relationship with them. Probably, if I looked at the situation of my departure there, I think the club panicked. I think we had some tough games in that period of time, even though we were 5 points above the relegation zone. And I think the club panicked at that time. And of course, as an owner, you've got to make these decisions and difficult decisions. But it certainly wouldn't, I don't think, would have had anything to do with personality, because I say we had a very good relationship. And what you see of Delia and Michael is exactly how they are. They've been associated with that club and have pumped money into that club for an awful long time.
Yes, Chris, obviously you went to... Do you want to go?
No, go on then.
Yeah, so
Well, you've got to decide who's just a better question.
Go on.
Yeah, so obviously you moved to Brighton, which was a different type of task. You, I would say, rebuilt the shape of the club, took them into the Premier League. And what we see of Brighton today is largely owing to, the work that you've done. So talk us through the way you restructured the club, getting promotion and consolidated the club into a Premier League team. Because when you see the owner, Tony Bloom, who obviously earned his corn in the gambling world, he seems to be a very sharp thinker, forward thinking, and a loyal man. So what's it like working with him?
Okay, well, I'll go back to the first, and of course, in my time there, I'd been out of work from my time at Norwich, and going back to the previous question, I had offers, not so many because of the timing, but I had offers to get back into the game, which I chose to take. So I got the job at Brighton on the 1st of January.
So, Chris, which clubs were interested in your services at the time?
Well, that's something, I think, as you already know, that 3 of you already know that I'm not allowed to divulge.
Okay.
But I can tell you that there has been interest. And remember, when I talk about, and every manager will talk the same way, when that there has been interest or opportunities, that none of that is guaranteed. What there can be talk and there can be interest. But until you go somewhere or until an official offer comes from somewhere, then that's all it is interest. So we were when I went to Brighton, the club, from having been in 2 playoff positions, not that season, but the 2 previous seasons before. I'd known the club. I'd taken a Birmingham team there. Was aware of the stadium, wonderful stadium. I was also aware of the facilities that they have, which are, for Championship club, exceptional facilities. So that I was aware of, and of course the previous manager had just gone, and I think sometimes when you know that a manager's gone, you are hoping you are going to get a call, and that was the case. It's a club that I knew. I knew about the facilities, and what I also felt was that this is a club that had been better in 2 seasons before that. Had gone through a difficult time. A manager changed the structure of the team, and what the team, I felt, needed to do was get back to some basics, and that was what we did. We implemented some fundamental basics to make sure that we got out of the relegation zone, which we did, and to be able to grow. And then, of course, what you were relying on is good recruitment, good coaching during that summer period and pre-season period, and to start well the following season. And that is what we was able to do. But I had a lot of support from the club. I say recruitment, medical staff, sports science, and of course from above, I had good support from the club.
Chris, how was it, working with Paul Barber? Because during this pandemic, we've seen him a lot, doing interviews with Sky, getting his face out there. He's one of the chairmen that I hear from the most. So how was it working with Paul Barber?
Well, I think what you'll see with Paul is that he speaks very well.
Very eruditely, yes.
Well, very well, very elegant, very thoughtful in everything that he says. And I can honestly tell you, and probably if it was different, I probably wouldn't tell you anyway. But it wasn't different. In 4.5 years I was at the club, I had a very, very good relationship with the CEO, Paul Barber, the chairman, which is the owner, and of course the board. I had a very, very good relationship with them in the 4.5 years that I was there. So if you're asking me what it was like to work with them, it was very professional, very supportive. Communication was always very good, and for however many potential managers that you speak to, but particularly his era, that is an important aspect of management. It's one of the things, if we talk about managers and coaches wanting to coach, wanting to be on the training pitch, then relationships, particularly with your board and board of directors, have become even more important over the years, and of course in this modern game.
Yeah, I remember at the end of the season, you were doing the lap of honor with your grandchild, and next came the announcement that Chris Hughton had been sacked. And at that moment and hold on, what's going on? This is a man that's brought this team up, consolidated themselves as a regular Premier League team. How did it feel when you got that message, and how was that message relayed to you? Was it a face-to-face chat or was it via text?
Well, you're asking for very personal details there. so probably what I can tell you is that which is what I said, and generally I haven't said too much because I've always preferred not to, and I've always preferred to move on, as I've already said to you. But what I have told people and what I have said is that I never saw it coming. Because, on most occasions, and you've already asked me the question quite professionally about my time at Newcastle, but I can honestly say that no, I didn't see it coming. We'd achieved what we wanted to achieve, and I'll go back to what I say about clubs like Brighton, a wonderful club. If I'm looking at the facilities that they've got in the stadium, but only the second season in the Premier League, and it's about staying in that division. So no, I didn't see it coming. The way that it was relayed to me, I don't think I've ever said, and unfortunately for you three, I'm something that I'm still not prepared to share. But what I have shared with you is, yes, huge disappointment.
Chris, we're all making exclusives, For the past 3 weeks, we've been breaking exclusives, so the floor's yours.
Chris,
Okay,
give us something, Chris. Give us something that you haven't mentioned before, Chris. We've had it, Chris.
Well, one exclusive is that we had to have a shortcut in this great interview we're doing because one of you had a problem with your microphone.
That's quality.
Yeah, so Chris, since you've been out of work, obviously you've been rumoured to be linked with a number of jobs, should I say, namely West Ham and Watford. Were you ever approached about, replacing Pellegrini or Javi Gracia, because there was rumours that were rife that you were, in the frame for those jobs?
Yeah, I mean that I heard and I understand, and there would have been others to put to your list, but I think as a manager that's out of work, the only reply that I would ever give regarding an approach from a team or an interview from a team would be if it came from that individual team, because it's not my responsibility. It's a responsibility very much of the team to make that public knowledge, and I have too much respect for anybody that possibly that I might have been linked with or spoken to divulge that when they haven't. But what I can tell you is that in the period of time that I have had offers to get back into.
Is that game. Premier League or Championship, Chris?
What I can tell you is that the large majority of that was Championship.
Okay.
But that's what I can tell you without naming names, and that's something that I must admit I'm really pleased with, because it means that I'm in a position where I have been made offers. I'm also in a position where I've got to feel it was right for me. Some of them opportunities were quite early, I must admit, having left Brighton, and I've got to make sure that it's the right move for me. But the fact that I have had offers is something that's been pleasing and very encouraging for me, and certainly if I look at my appetite into the game, it's as strong now as it was the day that I left Brighton.
I have one final question, Chris, and that is obviously talking about, what lies ahead for you in future. Now, if we, for sake of comparison, take a player who's out of contract, they'd obviously be ticking over by, still doing their sort of sessions in the gym, running and whatnot, just to keep themselves sharp. So what does a manager out of a role do to keep the tools sharp? Whilst he's out of work, and what have you been doing since sort of leaving Brighton?
Yeah, it's a good question, and probably if I look at this lockdown that we had, and obviously going on, I was probably sort of prepped fairly well for this period of time, because I've been out of work for a period, and I'm somebody that very much likes to keep busy. And I think that initial period, when you lose a job, at that initial period is a little bit of downtime, and of course you're getting so many messages. It's about going through your messages, speaking to as many people as you can. But I was exactly the same. I mean, when I lost my job at Newcastle, I think within a week I was out watching games. Exactly the same at Norwich, and this, although the timing was different, but even in pre-season I was out watching pre-season games. Of course, with what's happened in football, up until of course the games finished, I was out watching maybe sort of 2-3 games a week, which I think continues to give you a knowledge of teams and players and playing styles and what have you. Outside, it's about educating yourself, reading as much as you can, doing a few webinars. One thing that I must admit that the LMA have been very good at are a lot of the webinars that they've put together. I've done some of the work for them. So it's about sort of keeping as busy as you can. Now, all of that can't be around football because it can only take up so much of the time. But just keeping yourself fit, going to the gym every morning, reading football books, and also non-football books, keeping your mind active. But I think when you're somebody that's always been as busy as what I am, and I think what most managers are, it's very, very hard then to switch off from it. So, I've enjoyed this, I must admit, with you three lads, and this is very much sort of part and parcel also of me talking about football, being involved in football, seeing what's going on, and keeping myself as busy as possible.
Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast, and we appreciate all your support, and we hope to see you back in management at the top level very, very soon.
Which is what you deserve.
Yes.
Listen, I appreciate it. We're obviously going through very difficult times with the pandemic and of course everything that's gone on with the racial issues over the last week or so. So yes, we need to get through that, to make the improvements that we can, and continue that thirst for knowledge. And that's what I think we're all doing. You three want to be the best you can at what you're doing, and exactly the same with myself. I've been coaching, managing for that long, but the game is changing exactly the same way as your game is changing, and the only way to keep on top of that is to continue to educate yourself. But I wish the three of you all the very best for endeavours, and hopefully I'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you, Chris.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Chris.
Thanks.
Great stuff. It wouldn't be a Beautiful Game podcast without a shameless plug right at the end. So before we sign out, I'm just going to remind all of you guys, if you're not yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, it's the Beautiful Game Podcast. And you can also follow us on Twitter at podcast_TBG and on Instagram at pod_TBG. And you can listen to all of our episodes on Spotify, SoundCloud, and on Apple Podcasts as well. And if you're listening in on Apple Podcasts, please make sure you leave a 5-star review We're going to leave it there until the next episode. Over and out.
Peace.